Practice 101 for the SCA. This is basically a primer for information that is, it's a thing. So this is going to be the Midrealm version versus the known world version. The Midrealm version specifically covers information regarding the Scribal community, specific to the Midrealm, but we'll get to that when we get to it. So in addition to the RUM disclaimer for recording and for broadcast, I also have a disclaimer as well. So this class is intended to provide a baseline of knowledge for the general public and or allies. Any person who is considering gender transition should speak to their medical and or mental health care provider for further information. So basically, I am not the person you should consult for this. Talk to your medical care team if that is a path that you're looking to pursue. So that said, we're going to start with the basics. So defining sex and gender. So sex, what is it? Basically, it's going to be your biological assignment at birth. For males, it's going to be defined as an individual who produces sperm, and then later on in life, they develop facial and body hair as secondary characteristics when they hit puberty. Females, they produce eggs, and then they also develop breast tissue as secondary characteristics as well at puberty. And then you've also got a third categorization of people who are intersex. Those individuals are going to be people who possess characteristics of both. They're often assigned a gender based on genital representation at birth, and they may undergo genital reconstruction surgery shortly after birth at the will of the parents for representation of male or female. Now, it is important to note, though, that in the last decade, there's been a strong push for infants to not have that surgery and then to let them develop their sense of identity and autonomy naturally. And that's basically because we have more knowledge. So the more information that we get, the more informed that we are about biological and psychological processes, our information is updated and it's been developed further. So we've got sex defined as the biological. So then what's gender? So gender is going to be our traditional social constructs based on perception. So you have, typically speaking, in society, you have male and female. Male is going to be classified as somebody who's typically classified as someone who's strong, brave, muscular, has a bit of machismo, is very rah, go, very aggressive, very assertive. Females, on the other hand, again, society basis, are going to be typically classified as docile, quiet, doe-like. It's going to be your homemakers, going to be very reserved. I know that definition has changed, but this is the traditional definitions of what they have been traditionally defined as for most of our growing up. So you've got gender, you've got sex. Where does gender identity fit in? So gender identity gender identity exists on a spectrum ranging from masculine to feminine, and it's really going to be anywhere also in between or not at all. Within that large spectrum, you've also got individuals who identify as gender fluid. So then that person's day-to-day identity is going to fluctuate between male, female, or anywhere in between. And then you also have individuals who identify as non-binary. And that person's day-to-day identity is going to include aspects of both or neither masculine and feminine traits or roles. It really depends on that person and how they identify and how they choose to define themselves. So we've got all these terms. So what's transgender then? So simply stated, a person's gender identity and physical body are out of sync. For example, a person can identify as masculine while having secondary sex characteristics of a female. I'm a really good example of that. By the way, I'm Thane Samson Muscovich. I'm also known as Sammy in the SCA. I realized I failed to identify myself and introduce myself, so I apologize for that. Had very little sleep today. So bear in mind that with the experience of being transgender or transitioning, it's an individual experience, and it's very unique to that person. Not everyone who identifies as transgender or gender nonconforming is able to or wishes to access appropriate clinical care. It really depends on where they are in life, and there's a lot of different things that affect that. It might be where they live, what access they have to medical care, what, how safe they feel. So it's a very wide range of ways people can identify. So before we move on to interactions, are there any questions? Nope. Good. All right. So moving on to interactions. So appearances. Generally speaking, transgender nonconforming individuals may or may not wear clothing in alignment with their gender identity. They're going to be the same people you know, love, and respect prior to the transition, or lack thereof, depending on how they choose to identify. Especially if they're newly out, it's often a huge display of trust for them to present as their authentic self at an event. All of the stuff for interactions and appearance and whatnot are going to be mostly focused on how we deal with people in the society, but some of this also applies to outside the society as well. So just keep that in mind as we're going through stuff. Ultimately, you want to treat that person no different, because they really are no different than who they were prior to them, showing up as their authentic self. So one of the things that I personally love about the SCA is that we're an incredibly open and accepting place. We generally have the policy of ask questions. We remain open to change, and generally speaking, because of the tenets that we live by, it's a very courteous environment. So we strive to respect one another, and just show basic human decency to one another. There are some things that you can't ask, though. So you cannot ask anyone if they have had the surgery or similar questions related to their transition. It violates U.S. patient privacy laws, so HIPAA, and then it also violates the SCA's non-discrimination policy and harassment policy. So it really, unless you are you're planning on having intimate relations with that person, don't ask them those questions. You can't. So just keep that in mind. Long story short with that, just, be kind, be courteous, be polite to people. That's really what it comes down to. So forms of address. In terms of pronouns, there's 3 basic sets. So you have masculine pronouns, which are going to be he, him, and his. Feminine pronouns, which are she, her, and hers. And then neutral pronouns, pardon me, that are they, them, and theirs. If you're not sure about somebody's pronouns, just ask them. Many trans and gender nonconforming individuals would honestly rather you ask out of respect instead of assuming what their pronouns are. I know that actually just recently came up in the Middle Kingdom Scribe chat, where somebody had asked, well, hey, the Crown is doing this, why are they doing this? And ultimately it's to, they were using gender neutral terms for the populace, and ultimately it's so that we respect that person. And then they're also asking, when that person goes up, hey, how would you like to be addressed? So then when they announce that person to the populace, if we're actually in person at an event, then they basically are saying, hey, no, we're validating this person's identity. And that's something that the last several crowns have chosen to do, which personally I love the fact that they've done that. So, and along with that, if someone tells you their pronouns are different, try to use the same pronouns and name that they tell you. Now, some people may use pronouns that are not listed in that list of 3 sets that I provided earlier. Try to use the name and pronouns. If someone asks you to use that different set, please try to do so. So very early in people's transition, or if you see somebody for the first time, they're at an event, you're not quite sure how to, you're not sure how to address them, you may mess up. You probably will mess up. Don't make a big deal out of it. Basically, so calling attention to that error can create a bigger deal than it needs to be. And it also has the potential of endangering the transgender nonconforming individual. Again, it kind of depends on where you are in the kingdom, in the known world. Unfortunately speaking, some of the modern ways of thinking are not quite as advanced as we'd like them to be. So that might be an issue. The other thing too is, if you're, again, make a point of trying to use the correct pronouns going forward. A thing to note too, because in the SCA we love to tell stories. If you're telling a story from times past, try to use the subject's current gender markers and pronouns when you're telling that story, even if it is in the past. Depending on the person, that person may completely not want to be identified with that previous name or that previous gender identity. So again, using that current name pronouns, that's going to just revalidate their identity and reconfirm, no, I see you, I'm wanting to respect you. So court, since I brought it up, court, generally speaking, you're going to, if you folks are heralds, I'm not sure how many of you are, generally speaking, use the pronouns or form of address that most closely align with the person's gender identity. That also goes for scribes. The SCA College of Heralds approved gender-neutral forms of address on scrolls and in court as of July 2018. So there are 3 forms of address for gender-neutral: armiger, noble, and gentle. So generally speaking, in a note on that, in our order of precedence, actually not in the order of precedence, but in the award recommendations, there's actually a listing there now where it's male, female, or other / non-specific. Something that I've been telling people, that I've been suggesting people to do, is if you know that person identifies as a form of non-binary or gender variant, that they're not using the standard pronouns of, you know, he, him, his, she or hers, they, their, theirs, include that information in the recommendation, because then that will get passed on to the dragon signet, or if it's a baronial signet too. I know that a lot of the baronies are starting to add that information as well, so that they can pass that information on to the scribes, and they can include that in the scrolls. It's just it's a small thing, but it makes a world of difference, and it makes a big deal to that person. Again, it's just that whole, you know, showing a little bit of respect and just reconfirming their identity to them. So what do you do about somebody who has received an award but is transitioned after they've received it? Well, thankfully, our kingdom is really, really great about providing our populace with the opportunity to have the order of precedence updated. It's just as simple as sending an email to the OP clerk. And you can also request an updated scroll to be created with the new SCA name if it's changed and their gender identity. So, like I said, the order of precedence, you just email the order of precedence clerk, and they can change that information as necessary, because it does have information now about the titles that people use. Also in the Midrealm, we have the profiles now. If you have not gone on to the services portal, it's a really good idea to do so and get your information updated. It has a feature in there where you can literally input any title that you are using, that you've been granted. And it's a great way if people are researching you for an award, that they can cross-reference that. Also, it allows the signet to cross-reference that information as well. So, updated scrolls. So there's 2 ways that you can get an updated scroll. The first one is that you can contact the Kingdom Backlog Signet. I actually had them on for, I had the Dragon Signet on for a previous version of the previous iteration of the class, and she actually advised that they have a limit of 2 to 3 years for prior for requests. So just bear in mind that if a name or gender identity has changed somewhere in that 2 to 3 year mark, you can request that from the Backlog Signet. Otherwise, you can always commission a scribe. A lot of our scribes in the Middle Kingdom, and even outside of the Middle Kingdom, are willing to work with somebody and say, hey, I had a gender I transitioned. I'd like to get an updated scroll that reflects this. How can we do this? And you can negotiate privately with that scribe as well. So that is an option. So before we move on to history, which is a whole entire fun thing, are there any questions? Nope. All right. So moving on to history. So history comes with a little bit of a disclaimer. Again, because a lot of the information is, we're consistently compiling it and whatnot. There's consistent research coming out. So there's a little bit of information about terminology, and there's also just about bias as well as you're doing research. So as far as terminology, until the late 1800s / early 1900s. So really when we're seeing the development of the Industrial Revolution and all of the scientific developments that happened around that time, there was no clear definition of what defined being transgender. The term and definition, in fact, didn't exist until the late 1800s. Early scientists defined being transgender or gender nonconforming as being mentally ill. So during that time period where we have the Victorian era, we're moving out of the Industrial Revolution into the Victorian era. That's when you're starting to see you're starting to see all the scientific developments. You're starting to see all the terminology come about and how we're starting to classify things. We'll actually get into the definition a little bit later because it applies to something else that comes up during the class. So I also mentioned about biases. So there are few to no notes or documents stating the reason why someone may have lived as the opposite gender or as an iteration of non-binary gender presentation during the period that the SCA covers. For the purposes of this class, I used before 1650 Common Era. I know it's kind of our last-ditch, latest thing that we can use for research, so that's my hard stopping point, and I go prior to that. And everything before that. So it's not just the Middle Ages and the Mid-Renaissance, it's everything, even going back to the Bronze Age and further. Basically from human life to 1650. Something to know about that is that various cultures have different gender expressions, and they may have just accepted people as they are. There wasn't really a whole lot of, well, this person is this person's that. Just you're a person is a person is a person is a person. It kind of depends. One of the things that I mentioned, I said about biases. Modern history, or a lot of the modern documentation that we have currently, it's often viewed through the lenses of Christianity and colonialism. So it often makes it difficult to decipher the intent of those who lived in period, especially if you have cultures that are outside the spectrum of Christianity. A lot of the documentation has basically been lost to wars, to sieges, or just, hey, we're going to take this over and we don't want to leave a trace of them. Like I said, there's a lot of documentation that's been lost. There's a lot of documentation that has been destroyed. And there's also some that has been hidden and is being rediscovered. I mean, case in point, we just had in Africa, in Nigeria, I believe, there was a whole library full of 10,000 or so documents that were previously believed to be lost, but now they now exist, or they exist again because they've been refound. So we're going to start back in 1460 before Common Era. One of the earliest mentions of someone who presented or lived part of their life as the opposite gender was the Pharaoh Hatshepsut. So when Hatshepsut became pharaoh, they took on a masculine role. Hatshepsut was born as female, and they became pharaoh when their husband, who was their stepbrother, because the Egyptians had very strict ideas about purity of bloodline and how to keep that consistent through their lineages, because they wanted to just, hey, we want to keep the royal family kind of intact and not really branching off, even though they, a lot of times the pharaohs had multiple spouses on both sides of it, but they try to keep that bloodline, at least with the children, so they try to keep that tree trunk kind of straight. So that said, when Hatshepsut's husband died, they stepped up as regent. Then was named pharaoh because their son was too young to reign. The son was 9 years old, far too young to reign, couldn't really make good decisions, couldn't make good informed decisions. So Hatshepsut's like, yeah, no, I'm going to step up, I'm going to guide them and do this. And then, like I said, ultimately became pharaoh because, well, what better way to teach them and to get them ready for that role when they passed on. During Hatshepsut's rule, icons were created depicting the pharaoh as male with a fake gold beard. A lot of those were actually destroyed by the son, and then also the uncle as well, after she passed away, and Egypt got really weird at that point. like I said, Hatshepsut herself, she often went out and wore detachable beard and male regalia. So you had with the traditional two-set crown of with North and South Egypt, she would typically wear that and have the detachable beard, and basically said, "I am Pharaoh. This is the thing that we're going to do." Another notable thing about Hatshepsut is that they were the first pharaoh to name themselves as semi-divine while alive. Prior to Hatshepsut, all the pharaohs were basically elevated to divinity after they passed away. They were basically residing among the Egyptian gods. When Hatshepsut stepped up, and actually when her husband stepped up as well during that reign, they started switching their belief system to focusing on the Aten or Ra. So that started switching from being multi-theistic to here's one deity. This is the primary one that we're going to worship. And with that, the pharaoh then became the son of Ra, or the descendant, the immediate direct descendant of Ra. So that was the first time that actually became a thing. And then it ended up progressing and developing further with Akhenaten and then Tutankhamun and that whole lineage. So it was ultimately Hatshepsut identifying as male publicly and taking that role of pharaoh publicly was probably done for political reasons. But again, like I said, I'm not a Time Lord, much as I wish I was. I'm not a Time Lord, so I can't go back and ask, hey, I saw that you did. I see that you're doing this. I think that's really cool. Why? I mean, I can theorize, I can do research, but ultimately, without that ability to actually go back and ask, it's all up to speculation. But something in support of that, though, when Hatshepsut stepped up, this is a quotation from one of the articles that I used for the research. Hatshepsut also took a new name, Mat Kare. Sometimes translated as truth, Mat is the soul, Ka, of the sun god, Re. The key word here is Mat, the ancient Egyptian expression for order and justice as established by the gods. Maintaining and perpetuating Mat to ensure the prosperity and stability of the country required a legitimate pharaoh who could speak, as only pharaohs could, directly with the gods. By calling herself Mat Kare, Hatshepsut was likely reassuring her people that they had a legitimate ruler on the throne. Again, there was a little bit, like I said, there was a little bit of turmoil with the whole, well, husband's dead, son's too young, uncle is an advisor, but I'm the best ruler. So it's that whole, I'm going to assume this identity and I'm going to run with this. And because of the fact there's archaeological evidence that there were the statues and the icons with Hatshepsut with the beard. There's paintings of Hatshepsut with the beard as well. That all corroborates the whole, well, why else would you do this unless to have documentation? So that's one of the reasons why Hatshepsut is the first mention of this, or somebody, cross-dressing, for lack of a better term, and having that identity as something other than what they were born as. So moving up 1,000 years, 450 before Common Era, you see the Torah and the Jewish religion. So far as I've been able to research, they denote, they're the furthest back that denotes more than 2 genders. They actually denote 6 genders in the Torah and the Jewish religion. The first is Zahar. That term is going to be derived from the word for a pointy sword and often refers to a phallus. And it's usually going to be translated as male in English. Then you have Nekiva. That term is often the term is derived from the word for a crevice and probably refers to a vaginal opening. And it's usually going to be translated as female in English. Then you have androgynos, which of course we know is from Greek. There was a lot of crossing of languages because we have the trade routes and everything going around now. An androgynous person is someone who has both male and female sexual characteristics. Here's where it starts getting kind of interesting, though. Male and female are pretty typical for common language, but then we start seeing numbered references. For androgynous, there are 149 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud, So this is going to be a little bit further down the line, but those are going to be your 1st through 8th centuries Common Era law codes. And then 350 in the classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. Again, those are still being developed, and that's going to be from your 2nd through 16th centuries Common Era. So so you're starting to see this whole, wait, this isn't just male and female. We also have this ambiguous, this basically this genderqueer, androgynous, we have this person that is, we have this identity, we have this third identity. So this is kind of cool. So then you move on to another one, which is Tumtum. Tumtum is going to be a person whose sexual characteristics are indeterminate or obscured. Modernly, it's going to roughly translate to somebody who's non-binary. So again, like we mentioned earlier, there's not quite an easy definition, but it's someone who's who's non-binary, who doesn't really fit either side of that spectrum, or really in the middle, like androgynous would. There are 181 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and 335 in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. Both of those already, there are over 500 references for each of them in both of these codes, in all of this documentation, for both people who are non-binary and genderqueer. And of course, this is going back as far as 450 before Common Era. We also have Alonit, which is going to be a person who is identified as female at birth, but develops male characteristics at puberty and is infertile. There are 80 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and then 40 in the classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. So that is going to be somebody who's going to be transmasculine or female to male transgender. And then finally you have Sadis. A person who is identified as, they're going to be a person who's identified as male at birth, but then develops female characteristics at puberty and or is lacking a penis. Now, Asaris can be naturally Asaris, which is Sadis Hama, or they can become one through human intervention, also known as Sadis Adam. Pardon me. Modernly, it's going to be someone who is going to be transfeminine or male to female transgender. There are 156 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and then 379 in the classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. So, I mean, we're already seeing the presence, we're starting to see the language, not in English, of these other genders aside from male and female. And it's codified in, like I said, the Jewish law codes and in their religious texts, before Common Era. So we're seeing this before the advent of Christ, where we have this, and we have this documentation. And of course, in the Middle East too, we're basically is the creation point, for lack of a better term, of Christianity and all the three major religions that sprung forth from there. Moving over to India, 400, and also moving up about 50 years, you've got 400 before Common Era. So the Hijra community is the earliest documented time period of when we've got reference for them. The Hijra were first mentioned in the Kama Sutra, and that was written as early as 400 before Common Era, like I said. Hijra can be eunuchs, intersex, or transgender, and they've been part of South Asia's culture for thousands of years. Eunuchs are celebrated in sacred Hindu texts such as the Mahabharata and the Kama Sutra. And then they also enjoyed influential positions in the Mughal courts. They were often going to be your courtesans and people of influence, holy people, and people who would basically say, here, let me introduce you. They were very well connected in their own ways. Here, let me introduce you to this person. I know them, or I know this person in this person's court. And they were forging a lot of these political connections, even if they were not publicly seen. So but again, you're seeing this, you're starting to see this not just in the Middle East, but also in Asia, and you're starting to see in other places too, where people are just, hey, this is a person, they're well respected. So this is a thing. Moving up about, 600 years, 203 Common Era. So we've now leapt over into Common Era, where we're most familiar. You've got Elagabalus or Heliogabalus. They chose to use that name alternately. Again, there's a lot of the sun worship, which is why, with Helios. So there was why there was that change of name. That was the deity of choice for that reign. Elagabalus was a Roman emperor who was born male and then chose to live as female and then chose the title of empress during her reign. She was known to frequently wear cosmetics, and she also dressed as female. She also was known to have solicited physicians who could provide her with surgery to give her female genitalia. Something on that note, there's also been documentation that we've seen from various medical journals where not only have you seen, started to see the lobotomies and started to see some of, the relieving pressure from Egypt, but you're also starting to see very basic, going back to Egypt, you had the first advent of birth control. You had the first time where you're relieving pressure from the brain to relieve migraines or other mental issues. You have all these very, for what we consider high risk and kind of advanced surgeries, they were doing those as a fairly regular thing. So having surgeons or physicians that basically perform gender confirmation surgery is certainly not out of the realm of possibility. And there have absolutely been there's absolutely been documentation where you see, the little bits of documentation that we have, there's been records of that where this is a thing. And it might not necessarily be the same way that we assume it to be done now, but it might be a variant thereof. So that was absolutely possible in ancient Rome, before their demise and whatnot. So moving up from Rome, you've got Saint Anastasia the Patrician in 567. At this point, we're now very fully into the Common Era. Saint Anastasia the Patrician was a female who lived part of their life and was accorded burial rights as a male monk in seclusion from most people. So what had happened was with that, Anastasia was betrothed to a French count, or a French noble, rather. I can't exactly remember the title at this point. They were betrothed to a French noble, and they went to the local father abbot, and said, "Hey, this isn't going to work. He's kind of a jerk, and this is not going to work. Like, this is not going to be a good fit for me. I don't want to go through with this marriage. By the way, I'm really, really interested in learning more about the scripture." Well, 567, you don't see a whole lot of women that are touching the scripture at that point. So Father Abbot basically said, "Here's the deal. I will condone this under one condition. You see that cave up there? You're going to live up there, and you're going to live up there in seclusion. And then if for some reason somebody is going to, if for some reason you are seen, you're going to be in robes, hide your face. But we're going to tell all the brothers down here at the Abbey that you are devoting your life to the scripture. I'll have one or two brothers that I trust. They will come up, they'll bring you your rations for the week, they'll bring you the materials that you're going to study, and then that's the only contact you're really going to have with the outside world. That's what I'll do for you." So Anastasia's like, I get to study the scripture, which I'm really passionate about, and I don't have to marry the French noble who is known to be abusive and kind of a jerk. Yeah, I think we're going to go with this one. So she did. So Anastasia lived up there. The Father Abbot knew about this, obviously, and obviously he must have been pretty young. And then also the one or two brothers knew about the arrangement and would take rations up as necessary. So Anastasia died, and the Father Abbot sent a letter to the Pope. Well, it's not exactly getting a letter from France to Italy. They're pretty close, but they aren't that close. It's going to take a few months to get there and back. It's a whole big thing. It's not, just like we had the Pony Express here in the United States, They kind of sort of did, maybe if you were lucky. It certainly wasn't nearly as fast. So there were several months that went by, and as far as the canonization process goes, it was really fast. Normally, someone isn't canonized for decades, if not hundreds of years after their death. Saint Anastasia, basically because of the fact that she gave up she gave up her identity essentially. She essentially gave up her identity and committed herself to the scripture. The Pope's like, you know what? That's a great act of sacrifice. We're going to canonize you. So very quickly, literally a few months after she died, she was canonized. And of course, the whole story came out of, oh hi, there's this person, blah 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 blah. So that was that whole thing. The reason why I include Anastasia in here is because she willingly gave up her identity. She very knowingly accepted the fact that, hey, I'm going to identify as male, partially for survival, partially to obtain this goal. But it's something that it's something that is worth noting, just because of the fact that that's not, you don't do something like that without knowing the risks and without making a conscious decision to move forward. So even, of course, now we know because of the research that's been done, oh hi, this is what this person's actual name was. But at that point, the brothers down in the abbey, they didn't know who she was. They just said, there's this brother up there, they're pious, they're devoting their life. That's all they knew. And Anastasia had to be okay with that. So that is why she's included on this, even though and again, like I said, I'm not there. I can't ask, why are you doing this? So I have to look at my research and go, okay, this is why we're doing this, and this is why we're doing the thing. Moving up about 750 years, you have a Jewish poet and philosopher, Kalana ben Kalana. So as far as the trans and gender non-conforming community and historically speaking, Kalana wrote Evan Bohan, which is a poem that discusses transitioning and being genderqueer. I'm going to actually read part of the poem because I think it's really poignant and actually gets the point across pretty well. Actually, part of it. So the first stanza of it: what an awful fate for my mother that she bore a son. What a loss of all benefit. Cursed be the one who announced to my father, it's a boy. And then goes on to talk about all of the trials and tribulations of identifying as male and not quite fitting. Part of the lament, a little bit further down, I believe in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th stanza. Father in heaven, who did miracles for our ancestors with fire and water, you changed the fire of Chaldees so it would not burn hot. You changed Dinah in the womb of her mother to a girl. You changed the staff to a snake before a million eyes. You changed hand to white, and the sea to dry land. In the desert you turned rock to water, hard flint to a fountain. Who would then turn me from a man to a woman? Were I only to have merited this, being so graced by your goodness? That explicitly talks about transitioning. Admittedly, this is a translation that was done by a rabbi, but from the original Hebrew to English, that it's pretty clear cut. Where, there are other parts of the poem where if you have access to the notes, it is in the first appendix. The translated copy is, rather. If you read through the poem, it talks about being the good Jewish wife, taking care of the husband, taking care of the household chores, raising the children, doing all of these things that were traditional feminine roles for their community. And also then too questioning God, saying, why can't you do this? you know, I'm praying to you, I'm praying for this, I really, really want this. And, you know, yeah, and also talking about the, you know, that, again, like I said, talking about being the good wife, about talking about the wedding day, dressing in the finest jewels, dressing in the finest of linen, having these, basically these daydreams and saying, I really, really wish this was my life instead of this life of being masculine. Like, I'm being forced to go into these roles that I'm not suited for. And it's just an excellent, excellent piece of period literature because of the fact that this is 1322. Bear in mind, this is a Jewish philosopher, but at this point, you're starting to see a lot of the very hard-nosed. You're starting to see a lot of the very hard-nosed roles defined. Also in the 1300s, you're starting to see some of the different empires collapsing and rising, and all of the turbulence that's starting to develop more in the Middle East, including with the Jewish community, and the fight with the Christians and the Muslims, and all of the different, like I said, all the different turbulence. And then a little bit later too, you're also starting to see the rise of the Inquisition, which leads us to Italy. 1354, we've got Rolanda Rancagua. She was a prostitute who identified as a woman, was born male, and supposedly had feminine features. Again, another quotation that I found from one of the articles that I referenced. Pardon me. And he continually frequented the prostitutes of Rialto in bed, and going to the public baths with them, and meanwhile he hid his member on both sides so that no one ever noticed, and that they all very clearly considered him a female. So with that, like it was mentioned, Rolandina had, supposedly had very feminine features, was probably closer to being androgynous, or an androgynous in presentation when they were very young. So she, like I said, she eventually, she probably couldn't find work because she probably was, was not comfortable doing the traditional masculine roles that were prescribed. Because, like I said, at this point, 1354, you're starting to see the Inquisition take hold across Europe. You're starting to see that very heavy presence of Christianity, where it's very hard, the very hard-nosed patriarchal roles. So Rolandina was prosecuted as a prostitute by the Lord Doge in Venice and condemned to be burned. So she, like I said, she's sentenced to death. She did not recant her statement of identity even when faced with death. She literally basically said, okay, you're gonna put me on the stake. Okay, I'm still a woman. You're not gonna force me to change that, even though I'm being threatened with death. So that rings true for a lot of identity, where if people who are transgender nonconforming, they're not pretending, they are very much their identity. And this just reconfirms that. Even with faced with certain death, because you don't exactly come back from being burned on the stake too easy. Even with being faced with certain death, she didn't recant her identity. She said, nope, this is me. Even if you threaten me, I'm gonna go out saying that I am who I am. This is what it is. 11 years later, again, the Inquisition is tracing through Europe, doing its thing. You have Christine de Pizan. She was a Venetian who was a poet and author at the court of King Charles VI of France. So she basically was approached by King Charles VI and said, hey, you're pretty smart, you're really intelligent, and you've got some ideas that I'm kind of interested in, because it's France, and they are a lot more free-thinking than most of Europe. Even now they are. So even in the 1300s, they were still they were kind of very forward-thinking. They're very liberal thinking as well. So she found a place in that court and became, and the king was her patron. During that time in King Charles VI's court, she wrote the Book of Three Virtues in 1405. So in that book, she wrote and theorized that souls have no gender, but they inhabit masculine or feminine forms based on the will of God. She also argued that the souls of masculine and feminine individuals are created in God's image and are equal to one another in all things. Part of this also is that she theorized that a person's gender can change by will of the Spirit in accordance with the will of God. As a direct quotation from the Book of Three Virtues, the composition of one's body is arranged so as to reflect the gendered form in conformity with one's gendered offices. If the duties change, the essence has to change, which means the constituents have to be arranged. First of all, Christina Pizan was not very well liked in Italy because she was a feminist. She's probably going to be one of the earliest examples of a feminist in period for us. And of course, also we have the courtesans as well, and the various courts otherwise. But at least in Europe, during the Inquisition, this was something where you would be persecuted and probably be accused of being a witch, or working or basically going against the tenets of the church. So again, she was basically adopted by the French court and said, hey, we have all of the brightest scholars, we have all of this knowledge, we have all of these resources. Come over here and do your theories, do your research. Here are these people that you can have these intelligent discussions with, and it's natural and normal. So she did, and that's where we had the Book of Three Virtues. Like I said, she very strongly believed that men and women were equal, which is why, again, going into King Charles's court, she could stand toe-to-toe with every man there and sit there and go, no, I don't agree with you on this. Here's why. And then be able to back it up. And then have the same access to all the resources that they did, theological and otherwise, theological and scientific, to be able to support her documentation. The Book of Three Virtues specifically, though, I find fascinating because of the theory of gender. You don't really see a lot of this theory present during that time, because it's an incredibly radical thing to, it goes against everything that the Christian church talks about at this point, or the Catholic Church specifically talks about at this point. It's mind-blowing. Wait, what do you mean that basically God makes no mistakes? What about these people who we currently are persecuting for prostitution and for being some identity other than male or female? What? So this entire thing is basically saying, no. God doesn't make mistakes. He is choosing to change it's basically in support of saying, if someone's headspace and their physical presentation don't match, something's got to switch to get them in alignment. And that's essentially what this is talking about. And that's basically what transitioning is, in a very simplistic form. It's basically adjusting the physical form to be in line with how that person sees themselves mentally. And we have this being stated during the Inquisition. So that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal for that. And then also too, like I mentioned, she was one of the first really hardcore feminists, where you start seeing a lot of this in support of theology, this feminist statement being supported by theology. So it's just a really interesting time in that court. Moving up about 30 years, you've got John Rankiner, who was called Eleanor. This is over in England now. So she called herself Eleanor when called into court for prostitution, and she maintained that identity. So she may or may not have been charged for the crime as a way of not acknowledging her gender identity. There's a whole lot of complicated things with that, mostly with the whole, there's the whole concept of, if I don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist. And that form of erasure, which is, like I mentioned, complicated at best. And unfortunately, we still see a lot of that modernly as well, where if I don't acknowledge this person, their presence doesn't exist or their identity doesn't exist. And while it's not right, this is, especially then when, the 1300s, where, if it can't be explained by the Bible, we don't really want to hear it. Or if it can't be explained by law, we don't really want to hear it. And a lot of times those things were usually intermingled. So Eleanor also worked as a seamstress for 5 weeks prior to the Feast of St. Michael's, which is, again, kind of a big deal. One of the other things that I had read about her is that she basically, as part of being a seamstress, some of her fellow seamstresses basically adopted her and said, okay, come on, here's what we're going to do. Like, your name is Eleanor? Cool. Eleanor, we're going to get you clothing that matches your gender identity. And then we're also going to fix up your hair and your makeup so you're good. So you had this group of women that encouraged her and supported her, which, for all of the other references I've found, I haven't actually seen that documentation. And it was, for me, it was really cool seeing, like, hey, this is really, really cool that something that I see now in the transgender nonconforming community, and also with, with our allies, where we see people that are like, hey, I know this is new. This is a whole new world for you. Let me help you out. Let me be a mentor for you. So it was really, really cool to actually see this, especially given the time period and the fact that this is a thing. This is a thing where this is going to be a thing. Okay, cool. And then finally, in terms of history, in 1629, so kind of towards that end of that time period, also in America, well, will become America. So the new colonies, Thomasine Hall. So Thomasine Hall lived in colonial Virginia. This is actually some of the newer information that I have started researching. I admittedly have not dug a whole lot into it yet. I've just literally scratched the tip of the iceberg. Thomasine was possibly intersex, and from a legal document, testified that he was both a man and a woman. Again, Thomasine Hall, even though I didn't mention it in the notes proper, was also supposedly a prostitute, and and lived in colonial Virginia. There are not a whole lot of references I've found thus far for other individuals in that time period in the quote new world as we define it, but this is just one example of I'm sure many that will be coming, of many more that I'll probably find during more research. So other things. So I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the history section about the development of terminology. So the use of cis in reference to gender. This is the only time I mentioned this during the class, because of the fact that words evolve, words are important. It's important to know the history of the words that are used, even modernly. So this is the only reason that this is in here. So it originated in the 1880s as a way to describe chemical bonds. The terms trans and cis are literally from organic chemistry, which is why they are easily applied to basically the concepts of sex and gender. The terms cisgender and transgender were adopted by the LGBT community as a way to describe non-trans individuals in 1994, or to describe them as trans or non-trans. So 1994, it's a very, very new terminology. It's incredibly new terminology. Even though we've had examples of individuals that have been literally across the gender identity spectrum, we didn't have the language for them until 26 years ago. That's it. This terminology is very, very young in the grand scheme of the concept of the world. The biggest thing to know about this, though, and why I actually bring it up, is that the term was not originally intended as a pejorative or a negative term. It was only intended to be used as a descriptor. Literally, somebody who's transgender or non-transgender. That's it. it's important, like I mentioned, to bring it up because of the fact that language evolves, language changes. Literally in the last 6, 7 years, I watched the term go from being a very negative term to kind of petering out to being a negative term again, and now again we're in another downslope where it's, oh, real, it's actually just used as a descriptor and that's it. But I've watched that change literally over the last decade for, where people have been outraged or not based on the use of this term. So that's why I think it's really important to note, because it's part of our living history. Another small tidbit too, just on, that also kind of relates back to some of the interactions with people, especially where you're talking about we were talking about Eleanor and Rolandina, gender identity and sexual orientation. So first of all, they're not mutually exclusive. One's attraction to another is independent of their gender identity. And those terms may change if that person transitions and their attractions remain the same. For example, if the person who identifies initially as a straight male prior to transitioning, they would identify as a lesbian when their gender identity transitions to female and their attractions don't change. So I just tossed that in there because that's a question that I've had in the past. So I figured just getting that information out there is good. Like gender identity, sexual orientation is on a spectrum. So there's a whole wide variety of identities for people based on how they identify, how they personally identify, and how their attractions flow. Sexual orientation can and does shift for some people as they become more self-realizing. So it's kind of relevant because of some of this information, like I said, with the people that are in history, like how do they change. As far as the class, that's actually all I have for you folks tonight. I figure it's probably going to go a little bit longer. I also realize I kind of probably talked a little bit faster tonight. If there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to field them. So the floor is open for questions. And actually, I'm going to pop over to Facebook real quick and actually look at the event too and see if there are any questions there, because that's important. So give me just a second. Otherwise, I will also check the chat in just a moment as well. Don't play, please don't play. Check the...
Not a question, but a comment. I'll message you off the class about what you have on Thomasine Hall, because I know what grad school that brought up.
Okay, awesome.
So we'll see if it's the same stuff or if I have anything for you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Something else to note about the class, which I again forgot to mention. So this is a living document for me. There are, just like I mentioned earlier with some of the other stuff, like this is just a tip of the iceberg. There are so many things that I have not gotten a chance to research yet, just because of time and energy and everything else going on. Certainly not lack of, and also too, like figuring out like what search terms to use. So that's, it's very Eurocentric right now. I know that there are tribes in Africa where you have instances of gender nonconforming individuals. I also know that there are several Native American tribes, both South American and North American, that have the presence of gender nonconforming individuals as well. I have not had the time yet to research them. That's why they are not currently included. I don't want to misrepresent and misspeak about them, so I'm choosing the path of omission at the moment. But that is something that is on my list of things to research, because I do want to give due credit and diligence to those cultures. Also note too, like, in the very first iteration of the class, I spoke about Norse lore and the fact that Loki, for example, Loki's a trickster god, but Loki's a shapeshifter. Loki is equally comfortable in masculine and feminine roles, and is pretty comfortable. But again, partially because of the fact that it's lore and I want to do more research on it, it's not included. And also, again, I want to do more research on other cultures and other lore, so that I don't just have Norse, even though that is technically my personal specialization. So yeah.
Hey, I'm wondering, because you have a lot of documentation on people that were persecuted with prostitution, which is not surprising because that would have been documented. I'm wondering, because something I've seen in my studies through disability research is like during the witch trials in Europe, I wonder if there's any documentation of transgender, gender nonconforming people being persecuted during that, because I know the disability came as a witch because of their disabilities. So I'm wondering if there's anything else out there.
I'm pretty sure there is. Again, I just haven't gotten the opportunity, partially because of school, partially because of work, partially because of everything else in life. I haven't gotten a chance to deep dive into it yet. Yeah. But like to your point, like I remember seeing, I want to say the 1800s version of like the Salem witch trials, where there was that list that was floating around the internet a few years ago about all of the criteria where somebody would be a witch or be abnormal or be hospitalized. And and a couple of the things were like cross-dressing, and these things that we now qualify now, where we actually now say, no, this is really not mental illness. So I would be inclined to agree with you on that there are. I just haven't gotten a chance to research it yet.
Right.
So Refna, who is awesome with Norse studies and knows a lot more about that than I do because they specialize in that.
Okay, yeah, I'm jumping on video now.
Okay.
I'll talk about it. Hi. So I was laying down earlier, so I was off video. So the Norse sagas, in the saga of Rolf Galkersson, there is actually a really excellent example, and this is Bjornberg Thorberg, same person, who was born female and then transitioned to male and was known as male and referred to as king and referred to with male pronouns up until the time when he got married and transitioned back to the female role. And it's a very interesting, so the story is actually of the person who went to go get her hand in marriage. But one of the most interesting things about the story, while it is very interesting to see the switch and see how people are talking about it, is to dig into the Old Norse and the original and to look and see how people who were respecting him in his male role used male pronouns and the like, and people who were not were using female as disparaging him, which actually also has a lot to do with Norse culture and how male is seen as kind of more or better or something like that, but that wasn't necessarily tied to your physical gender.
Right.
It's a very interesting one, and it's actually one of the family sagas, not one of the heroic sagas, so women aren't treated as poorly in it. There's all sorts of other history behind it. But it is a very interesting one. It's a quite accessible saga, and you can get it in, if I pull it up here, library, 6 Sagas of Adventure.
Awesome.
And that is in Amazon, so that is the title to look for, but I will do here, 6 Sagas of Adventure. It's the only place I actually found it translated.
Okay, cool.
And so it is someone who did the translation and sells it through Amazon, and so I have it in my Kindle.
Nice. But, and evidently I'm now going to have to buy more books. Because
at least it's issued Kindle book.
I'm not complaining. I like books.
Right, and it's kind of fun because they're the sagas that aren't as like cold counsel of women. The women do the men wrong. So, and this particular one is all about like a whole bunch of marriages, and each successive generation has a harder time finding a wife.
Like
this wasn't one of the hardest. Marrying the guy thing wasn't one of the hardest. So.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just because of the fact that there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information that's kind of buried as well. Some of the stuff for Hot Chips that I literally just added some of that information the last few weeks because I'm taking a class and I've currently taking a class where the whole line of Akhenaten, where I'm like, oh, right, I knew that, but I forgot about that. With the whole concept of Hatshepsut claiming themselves as being semi-divine, as being a direct descendant of the Aten or of Ra. That whole concept of I'm a deity, and the whole that whole concept of of the pharaohs of Egypt claiming divinity, for as short-lived as it was, because it was very short-lived, in the grand scheme of their entire lineage. It was maybe 4 generations, and then it kind of died, and it died with Tutankhamun. And then the next invading group is like, yeah, no, we're going to go back to the old gods, and did that, and just and even Tutankhamun said, yeah, no, we're going to start transitioning back to the old gods, and we're going to do the old ways and all of this. So it was really interesting to see that ebb and flow and just everything else. And just, also just seeing the intersectionality of everything too is absolutely fascinating. Where, you do have that, where you do have the various gender roles, and you do have the, just all of it, where, that concept of divinity, and that concept of, just the whole concept of, your deity of choice says this is a thing. So it's just, for me, it's fascinating. But yeah. So thank you all for tuning in. I actually thought this was probably going to last a full 2 hours, and it's not, which is, it kind of depends on the class. Sometimes I have folks that ask questions throughout the class, so it's a little bit longer. But hey, this works too. But anyways, thank you all for attending. Thank you for the folks that provided suggestions and more feedback for me to go do more research, because summer break is coming. I got to have something to do.